Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final live broadcast from the Toolkits Fiction program. We are coming to you live from Melbourne's Wheeler Centre. Toolkits is a program run by Express Media, which is Australia's peak organisation for writers under 30. Toolkits is a 12-week digitally based program, and this is our second last week of this session. But all our broadcasts with guest artists are available. They're live streamed like this one, and then they're on the internet for posterity, the world to see. Over the last couple of months, we've had great sessions with both Omar Musa and Tony Birch as part of the fiction program, and the poetry program has also had some great guest artists. So if you missed those, you can check them out. And Toolkits is just one of the many programs run by Express Media, who you might also recognise as the organisation behind VoiceWorks. This one's my favourite cover. VoiceWorks is, they publish writing and art by artists under 25, and not only do they do that, they provide a really fantastic editorial program. They will give you feedback on your submissions, whether or not they're accepted for publication. And as somebody who is over 25 and can no longer have work published in VoiceWorks, I'll tell you that that's a pretty rare thing. In fact, I can't think of another publication that will just give you extensive feedback on things that they reject and or accept. And they've got some deadlines coming up for work. So VoiceWorks publishes fiction, poetry, non-fiction and art and comics. The 17th of September is the deadline for the next edition for fiction and poetry. The 3rd of September is the deadline for non-fiction pictures. And the 15th of October, that's how long you've got for art and comics. So you can check out their website for details on how to submit. And I can't recall what the theme is off the top of my head, but it's community? Immunity, thank you. That was just a little voice off screen. Immunity, not community. But you don't have to write to the theme if they prefer good writing over all else or good art over all else. My name is Jennifer. If we haven't met before, I'm facilitating the Toolkits fiction program, and tonight we're talking about polishing and editing your work so you can get it ready for publication. And I'm joined by editor extraordinaire, Elena Gomez. Elena is a poet and book editor. She's currently at Text Publishing. She has published herself poetry, criticism and essays in places like Overland, The Richard Brow, Cordite, Mascara, Literary Review and Scum Mag. And in 2015, she was a first draft writer in residence. She's also the author of a number of chapbooks, Her with Eddie Hopley, A Glazed Window with Fat Borders, Taut and Scullered, and Chill Flakes. And she's also currently completing an MFA at the University of New South Wales Art and Design. It's kind of fun when somebody else reads your own bio, isn't it? Do you think? Yeah, it's good. It's like somebody lists all the nice things you've done, but even though you've written it.
It feels weird to write it because you don't want to be saying all these things you've done, and then when you hear someone read it, you're like, oh no, if it was someone else's bio, I'd be happy to know about that.
So. Yeah, but when you're writing it yourself, you're like, oh, I've got tickets on myself. This sounds terrible.
Well done with the chapbook titles, by the way. I know they're hard to say.
There's anything else?
No.
Okay, glad. That's a note from one professional to you is that you should always check stuff before you read it out loud, which I did not do. Anyway, seeing as we're nearing the end of the Toolkits fiction program, I wanted to get a real life editor in to talk a little bit about what we can do to sort of make our work as strong as it can be before we submit it to publications, before we kind of fling it out into the universe and hope that it sticks somewhere. I was super stoked that Elena agreed to join us tonight because I'm a big fan of her writing, particularly her essays, but I'm also a big fan of her editing because she edited my most recent short story collection called Pulse Points, and she was a total dream to work with. So that's a little disclaimer, is that we do have a professional working relationship, but I think that will just make our conversation all the richer.
I think so, and the feeling was mutual.
I'm glad. Okay. We're just going to sit here and talk about how much we love each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, per usual, please feel free to ask any questions you might have for Elena about editing or writing. You can ask anytime on Twitter or Facebook. Just use the hashtag EMToolkits. yeah, let's get stuck into it.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with a real big question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Which is, why do you think we need editors? Why is an editor necessary?
Good question. I'm going to talk specifically about book editing. I know there's other kinds of editing with journals and in media, but my experience is with book-length works. So to that end, I would say editors are the people who help you make the book. Like you've done the work. The editor needs to sort of be the person who takes you through the technical writerly aspects, but they're also the person who is the closest reader of your work. It's a job that I think can't really be automated. It's not just about checking spelling and sentences and grammar. It's also the person who sees the vision for the book that makes it what you've come to it with and what it can then be. Does that make sense? It's a very broad kind of.
No, that makes sense. I think that's a great definition. How do you feel about what is your? I'm asking you like I don't already know, but what is your approach to editing in terms of? For instance, we might talk about some editors as being more interventionist, which is like it sounds. I guess being a bit more hands-on in sort of moulding and changing the author's work, and then there's a more non-interventionist style of editing, which is kind of the opposite. Where would you say be on the spectrum?
I'm generally not very interventionist, but every book is different, and I've edited commercial works, commercial fiction before, and genre fiction where you can be quite interventionist because there's a clearer idea of what works and what doesn't work within, say, a crime novel or a thriller. So I can be a bit more interventionist in that sense. And when we say that, we still mean that the author is okay with the changes. We're not ever saying like you have to do this, but in terms of how hands-on that process is, I'm generally trying to get the author to come to the solution themselves. So I might be asking questions more or rephrasing something and seeing how that looks, but not necessarily going in and changing everything. But yeah, I think it's such an annoying thing to say, but it always depends on the work and what you're looking at, what it needs, and if it's a newer author, or if it's someone who's not a writer by trade, they might benefit better from a heavy interventionist style of editing. But yeah, sometimes I don't have to do too much. I'm just tinkering.
Yeah.
I suppose. Yeah.
How did you kind of get into editing? We were just saying before the session started, we were talking a little bit about how there was a time before we realised that editors existed, or that we knew that it was a job that existed out there. But like for me, I kind of conceived as editors only as magazine editors for some reason. I thought of like kind of like, I mean, it was before Devil Wears Prada, but I kind of had that idea of like a fancy glossy magazine editor, and I never really conceived of book editing or like lit journal editing as being a job.
Yeah, I sort of had a vague idea that books were made somehow and ended up in my room stacked up. But yeah, I was saying before, I did a journalism degree because I thought this is where I can do writing, which is what I thought I wanted to do at the time. Realized that the things that you need to be a good journalist, good writing is not necessarily top of that list, and I didn't have the skills necessary, and I was volunteering at a local community radio station doing news there, and someone was just sort of, and I'd just graduated, and this person had said, you know, why don't you like books so much, do books. And so I started looking into, I was in Brisbane at the time, so I started looking at places in Sydney that I could intern at, and I did do a postgrad certificate at UTS. So that was similar to the RMIT one here, I think, but just getting hands-on copy editing experience, doing a course in structural editing, doing a course in book marketing and learning how the industry works, how books go from the finished edited product to out in the world is also part of that knowledge is part of the editorial experience. Yeah, that's how I sort of got into it.
And did you like it from the get-go? Like, I remember, I've never worked in trade publishing, but I've worked in educational publishing doing book editing. And I do remember studying editing, and like the first class pretty much, I was like, oh, there's this whole other world that's like built for people like me who are super nerdy about language, who really care about things like grammar and punctuation. And it's like the kind of problem that I want to solve. It almost felt diagnostic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that? Or did you kind of,
Yeah, I think the copy editing class is very hard, but it also, Nicola Shea taught it, and she taught it in a really accessible way that gave me this, it was a kind of an unlocking moment. And I think a similar thing happened in the structural editing class, where I suddenly could see what the job of editing looked like, and also how to read something with an editorial mindset, which I think if you're a reader of lots of books, you might just pick that up naturally, but there's a next stage where we know these things sort of in a gut way when we're reading. We might find something unbelievable or funny or not quite working, and we don't necessarily know why. It might be the reason we don't finish the book. It might be when we put it down and make coffee. But I guess learning how to, learning that was a thing you could unpack and think about, and getting the language to do that was this moment for me where I thought, I can't do anything else. Now.
I want to come back to that, but can you just do a really quick explainer of what structural editing involves?
So when you've written about 10 drafts of your novel by yourself and then shown it to your friends and then read it again, and you've got to the point where you've got an editor looking at it, they basically come and rip it all apart, and then you have to start again. It's a structural edit is looking at the bigger picture of the manuscript, looking at the architecture of it, doing maybe like an X-ray of it, taking note of who the characters are, what they're doing, where it's set, what is the narrative arc, where is the action happening, what's the shape of it, and then questioning every aspect of that, and maybe throwing it back to the author, or maybe figuring out, no, this thing that was bothering me is actually working really well, but you eventually go back to the author with suggestions rather than a big markup on the line. So you're giving them notes and questions to consider. Do we need this character? There's a lot of characters that are similar, or this happens very late, but it could be a really good start for the that sort of thing that you're looking at. So that's what I'd say a structural edit is. It's quite early on. There's not so much worry about spelling or grammar or names, but if you're noticing a lot of problems with it, you might mention it as a point for them to think about.
And so then later on, we will get to what we call a copy edit or a line edit at most places.
They're sort of interchangeable. I think line edit is the American sort of word, but it's basically going on the line and looking very closely at the copy, asking questions again, looking at how the language is working on a sentence level, but you might also move things around a little bit, and you might make more concrete suggestions on that level. So it's a bit more finicky, and it requires a much closer attention, I think, whereas a structural edit comparatively is very much about a first impression and an overall effect, and then twigging into what that effect is and what the author can think about.
And so then after you've done your structural edit, it's all fitting together nicely, you've done your line edit, the final step, there are many different things that happen in between, but if we look at kind of the bigger picture, often the last thing or the final thing that happens before a piece is printed or a book goes to print is proofreading, right?
So after it's been, the copy editing is also where we look at the styles and look at anything in the text that might change the design or give us something, heading styles or things like that. We then do a designed page, which is done with the typesetter or designer, and the text is run into proofs. It's all done on InDesign. And then you have the page proofs, which is basically what the printed book is going to look like. You might have, you know, whether you have folios, page numbers, or running heads, or if you want a pretty drop cap on your first letter of every section, that's what the proof stage looks like. And then we basically read the proofs as many times as we need to until it's print date / we get all the errors out. Because the proof stage does two things. In the original kind of mode of publishing, when it was setting type, it was a chance to check that everything had been set correctly. So you would look at the copy edited version and make sure it works. And we still kind of have to do that a little bit. But you're just making sure that no errors have been introduced. But it's also, and we can talk about this later, but it's also a fresh way of looking at the work that you've been seeing in one format. So seeing it laid out can sometimes bring to the surface a lot of things that everyone might have missed up until that point.
Yeah, and I always find that really interesting when sort of you see when things are typeset, it suddenly seems like there's more space to me between the words, even though you might have, I don't know, be working with, say, a Word document that's double-spaced or whatever it is. There's something spatially to me that's really different about seeing a page typeset, and there's something much more visual. Like my eye works in a different way when I look for patterns in like word repetition and things like that.
That can be a point where even if you've worked on that with the author, in the copy edit, you might suddenly realize, oh, we've still got all these reallys coming up in the dialogue, and yeah, it can be really illuminating. It's also a time to find any typesetting specific, not errors, but just things that need to be fixed. So we're looking at the spacing between words, making sure weird breaks haven't happened across pages or things like that, which is not something the author has to worry about. It's more an editing thing, but it's another aspect of the proofing because we're looking at it as printed work rather than just the words.
I just wanted to circle back around to something you were saying before about how, I'm not going to be able to say it as succinctly as you did, but you said something about how editing your own work, learning to edit gave you different skills as a reader. How does that kind of work, do you think, in practice? How do you approach a piece differently as an editor to the way you approach it if you're just picking it up to read it for pleasure or interest?
Mindset being, I guess, the reason I'm picking up this manuscript to read is I know that it's my job to provide some editorial feedback, so I'm already kind of tuned to look for things in a way that I'm not when I'm reading for pleasure. So I guess like people sometimes think that if you're an editor, you can't read for pleasure anymore because you just pick up all the mistakes. I mean, there are some books where I've read them and thought, if I was editing this, I might have tried to suggest this or this, and I have no idea what relationship that was or how that worked behind the scenes. But most of the time when I'm reading because I'm interested in the book or the author or the subject. So I guess I'm not looking for errors, and I'm not looking to be tripped up. I'm not looking to diagnose it, as you were saying, which is a really good word choice. But and then when I'm editing something, I guess I'm trying to open up as many kind of receptors as I can to pick up things that less intrusive kind of read would pick up. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it totally does.
Just the mindset, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Sometimes I have this thing where, like, I think it's hard to switch on and off, I think. And it's also it's hard sometimes to read stuff as a writer. Everything you read as a writer. And so you were talking about times when you think, oh, I would have edited that differently or approached that differently. And like, I know there are times when I've been reading books and thought, oh, I wouldn't have made that word choice. And part of that is like what makes that writer's voice distinct from mine, or what makes them the kind of writer they are. But how much does, I think editing and writing are really interesting in that I don't know that many people who do both. like professionally speaking. I mean, a lot of writers have some editorial skill. They might do it as a day job, and a lot of editors might do a little bit of writing on the side. But I feel like it's quite rare to do both. Do you find that they complement each other in like a workable way, or is it hard to get a balance?
It sort of seesaws. I think I've wanted to be an editor more than be a writer. I've sort of, I guess I had to be an editor because that's a job. I mean, not the no, I was like, I need a salary, but also I wanted to, it was the thing that I thought I can do this full time.
Yeah.
I can't imagine someone like me doing writing full time, and I guess for me, writing is my escape place, and it's my practice in a different way. So I've always been happy to fit it around, and I also write the kinds of works that I would never work on as an editor, which helps. I think if I was editing that style, I wouldn't want to edit the style of writing that I do, and I wouldn't want to edit me either, but that's another story. But yeah, I think they, in a broad way, they complement each other, but also it takes a lot of, I've had to become really proactive and strict about keeping my writing going, because I've made a choice that I want to do that rather than easily going hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I remember like when I was studying editing, and a writing teacher said to me, I was telling a writing teacher at TAFE how much I loved it, and I was like, oh yeah, this just feels like this light bulb has gone off for me. And I had this moment, like exactly like you were describing, of like, oh my gosh, this is a job that I can do, which I'd never had before. And I felt like I'd fallen in love with it. And I was telling this teacher, and she was like, well, she'd been reading drafts of my manuscript, and she was like, well, you can't do both. You have to pick one. What are you going to do? And at the time, editing just seems like the much more viable option, because, I mean, as hard as it is to get editing jobs, it kind of seems easier sometimes than it is to make a living from being a writer. I mean, I guess it's kind of six of one, half a dozen of the other. But I remember thinking, I could really make a go of this. But then in practice, when I've had jobs, like day jobs, or I've been editing, like personally, I found it so much harder to write. And like now I'm in a job where I work full-time writing. And you would think, like before, I would have said, oh, that really saps my ability to do stuff outside of that. But it doesn't, because I guess like you're talking about different kinds of editing, those are different kinds of writing. And it's just really interesting that, you know, when you don't want to admit that an authority figure or like a parent is right. Yeah. I just recently had this moment of like, oh, this woman, like who's a friend of mine now, sorry, it's a woman, but this teacher totally knew like that I couldn't write and edit professionally at the same time. Yeah. But I think what you say about being disciplined is so true. Like making writing, even if it's not your main job, you know, being conscious that it's a part of your job and it's a part of your life, but it's your escape. And that's what it is, but you still have to make time for it.
I think, and for me, because editing, like writing and like a lot of creative area jobs, it's a job that can bleed into your entire life and become the thing that defines you and is always in your mind. And to a degree, it always will be, because it's that you can't not have that in order to do the job. Yes. So there is that, but I think it's really important for me to not have that happen. So I've always wanted to not be only doing my job. And as much as I love it and as much as it's something that I chose and love to do, I still am aware that it's a job and not me. So I guess, yeah.
So like healthy and grown up. So you work for a company that accepts what we call unsolicited manuscripts. That's not an invitation for, don't send your work until it's really ready to anybody, text or otherwise. But what that means is that you don't need an agent or some third-party intermediary to send your manuscript to text. And there are plenty of publishers in Australia who accept unsolicited manuscripts. But what that means is that you guys have what we would call in publishing terms a slush pile. I don't know if you call it in-house. Yeah.
But it's not derogatory. We don't mean it derogatory.
No, I know. I feel like some
Yeah.
publishers have another name for it, but that's the common name is the slush pile, which is basically like uninvited manuscripts. But from what I've heard, text has a really nice culture, as do many small, in particular Australian publishers, of reading each of those manuscripts and carefully considering them. When you, I don't know, sit down with some manuscript that's just hit your desk and you don't know anything about it or the author, what is something that really gets you going, like really excited when you see a manuscript for the first time?
That's a good question. I suppose the first thing I'll read is the cover letter when they've submitted it, and if I can read the cover letter without straining or getting distracted or getting confused, it's a really good sign. So I think the cover letter sort of something that shows readable, engaging writing straight off the bat will make me immediately sit up, and it can be any genre. So I think, that's such a. I wish it should be something more specific.
What should I get? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just thinking like me personally. I like a good hook, I guess, if there's something in the plot that's different from other books that's standing out, but also is grounded in a literary kind of culture or mood that I can recognize. Sorry, that's
No. I'm
good
just
writing.
Yeah, just write well, guys.
Yeah.
When you talk about a cover letter being causing you to strain, what are some weird things that people might do in a cover letter that kind of put you off?
A really common one is to tell me really personal kind of mini autobiography of their life and how they came to write the book. If you're writing a memoir, maybe that's interesting, and sometimes it is a memoir, but you want me to read that in the memoir maybe rather than on the cover letter. But that's probably the most common one that I remember is telling me too much about yourself. I think the nice way of saying that would be what I want the cover letter to do is bring out I'm interested in the work, and I want a cover letter that sort of tells me something that's going to make me excited to read the work. It can talk a bit about the synopsis. You can sort of give the elevator pitchy version of the book in that section, and then you've got the synopsis, which is another bit of the. I'm not speaking for all publishers here, but often they'll ask for a synopsis as well. The cover letter kind of sets the scene, and then the synopsis will be this is what happens. And then when you read, some people don't read them before they read the manuscript, but I like to.
Can you, I have been truly blessed in this life that I've never had to submit a synopsis for a novel or collection or whatever. And I say blessed because there's nothing I hate more on this green earth than writing synopsis. I think it's because, just personally, my stories are not about a lot of things, and I always feel like you have to have, say what happens in your synopsis. And in my head, I'm always like, oh, nothing happens, What are do you have any tips or things that you look for in a good tight synopsis? Or should it be tight? Should it be tight? 1 page? Should it be 10?
Tight is good. I think a good synopsis for me is one that introduces the tension straight away, doesn't give too much background in the lead up to the event. Sometimes the synopsis is it reads as though it's almost written before the novel was, and you've read all of this information, and then you start reading the novel, and it started a lot after that, and you just think, oh, this is what it's about. Yes. It's not what the synopsis said it was, but that was where the author was maybe working out what they were going to write, or thinking this is what the book is going to be. And then when they've written the book, it's been something different. So I guess accuracy is a good one.
Would you say For sure. Sorry to interrupt you. To do the synopsis after you've written your book.
Yeah.
Would that be a big one?
Yeah, I think that would be really. I mean, I'm not an academic in the strict sense, but I am doing a master's of fine arts, and I'm doing research papers based on that. And the advice I get given is write your introduction last.
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing to that. It's where you're setting out what your project is going to be, which is the plot of the novel. Yeah.
And what about, and sorry, I'm speaking for the manuscript as a whole here, not just the peripheral cover letter synopsis. What about things like formatting? I know that's a really nitty-gritty question, but it's really important, right?
Yeah, I think the reason we have the formatting guidelines is the sheer number of reading, and it's proven to be an easy way to read the text, and it requires the least amount of extra effort to figure anything out. It also doesn't color the manuscript in any particular way, so you're getting kind of a blank slate to work from. You don't want too much personality because that's sort of distracting. What you want is the words to do the work, and that formatting helps us as the readers not be distracted and get the most out of their reading experience.
So most publishers will have, if they accept unsolicited manuscripts or submissions, they'll have submission guidelines on their website. And so it's really important that you, if you're thinking of submitting, and this goes for lit journals as well, most of them, some of them will even have style guides that you can use to kind of format your work in advance with their, their preferred spelling and dash style and things like that. It's really important that you look at those individually, so that if one publishing house prefers manuscripts submitted electronically, another might prefer them submitted in hard copy, 1.5 point spacing, Times New Roman and 12-point font, or whatever it is. I have heard, I feel like you're being really polite, but I've heard other editors say that there's just nothing more annoying than getting submissions that kind of blatantly ignore those rules. Maybe you just don't care, I don't know. I guess it's a very.
I've never found a manuscript that I got excited by that was dolled up in some crazy fun way and
Comic Sans.
Yeah.
Perfume.
No, I mean, if you want to slip in a chocolate bar in your submission, it won't go uneaten. And the person at text, who sort of facilitates all the unsoliciteds might be really appreciative, but that's not something that will necessarily help you get published. It'll just help us get
survive
through the reading. Yeah, sorry, what was your question?
I know, I was just asking.
Oh, okay. Formatting. Yeah, I guess I will read everything and try to come to it with the same level of open-mindedness, but there's always going to be subconscious judging of a book by its packaging when it's coming from that thing. So I'd say, yeah, it's better to stick with it, and yeah.
Yeah, I think it helps your chances as somebody who's submitting work to submit it in the way that has been requested, really.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see why people might say, I want it to stand out from the pile and that, and there's ways to do that, but ultimately, if editors or publishing people are reading these unsolicited, they're looking for they're looking to publish something from it. They wouldn't ask otherwise. So all you need to worry about is getting the writing as good as you can. Yeah, I guess that's the thing I'm stressed the most above anything else.
Do editors, sorry, we just get the Hare Krishnas at the same time every single week. Do editors, how much do you care about things like spelling, punctuation and grammar, that kind of first pass, when you get a manuscript? Because I was telling last week, just with the Toolkits participants, we were looking at kind of sentence level craft. And I was saying how, in my experience, or I guess opinion, things like spelling, the editor's job in part, not their whole job, but part of their job is to pick up on mistakes like that. But I was saying I personally think punctuation is really important. It can vastly change the sense of a sentence and grammar and things like that. And so I was like, you don't need to know what a subordinate clause is, but it would be really great if you knew how to use a semicolon instead of a comma if that's appropriate. But do you actually care?
I care a little bit. And yeah, I guess if something's got lots of spelling errors, what it tells me is that the person who submitted it didn't read it before they submitted it, and that makes me think how much work have they put into this. I'm not going to read it and see a couple of spelling errors and think, no, this is terrible, like not good enough. But it is noticeable when the author doesn't want to correct all the spelling.
Yes.
And I have a wide like I try to think to have a tolerance for that. So I think when it pushes over to that limit where there's just a bit too much grammar and punctuation, there's always going to be that level of working on it when you're getting edited. But yeah, again, I think it's not the deciding factor for me. But it, again, coming back to that idea of making the manuscript something that you want someone to pick up and read and not want to put down, things like grammar, grammar in the sense of like things like having a grammar, even if it's not
traditional
English grammar, but having a sense of grammar in the work, having decent spelling, and mostly correct punctuation, it's all just going to make it easier for me to read it. So think about it as making a work ready so that someone won't want to put it down.
Yeah, and I think it's good to, like you say, just even if your grammar is kind of no grammar, or say no, I don't know, no quote marks or no capital letters, for instance, which might be really annoying to read as sort of, a long chunk of prose. But even if that's the grammar of your piece, keeping it consistent within the work.
I had an experience with that. Oh no, we're not ready for that one, but when I was being edited for my lithographies, I had weird punctuation quirks and grammar things, and being edited in that sense was really good because the editors really got what I was doing, and they were just pointing out when I missed it, and they were like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. Maybe you meant to do that here, or this would work well if we add this here. So yeah, you're right. It's the unification and the sense of it. I don't want to say consistency, but it's just like an idea of doing something.
Consistency isn't quite the right word, but making sure that you're achieving. I guess it just comes back to that whole idea of editing, making your work what it is you're trying to achieve. I feel like we had an experience like that with my book where I was doing something funny with, actually boring to explain, but dialogue I had very specific instances where I wanted dialogue in italics rather than in quote marks. And it was basically like a rhythmic and visual thing for me as a reader and as a writer, that it wouldn't disrupt the flow of a paragraph in the same way as a traditional line break, quote mark, line of dialogue would. And we had a very similar experience, I think, where you went through my book and were like, you've missed it here, it's not working here. And we were kind of able to negotiate that, which was really important.
Yeah, and I think that conversation was about me trying to understand what the purpose was of it so that I could see when it was working and when it
wasn't.
Well, maybe not even when it was working and when it wasn't, but maybe I could understand the logic behind it so that I could see how it functioned. And then, pointing out if you're doing it here, then you need to do it here, or we do it in another. Yeah,
and I mean, that's also good for you as the writer because it forces you, like that example is of something that I did quite intrinsically, and it felt right to me, but I'd never had to think about why I did it. And so then when we had that conversation, I was like, no, I know there's a reason for this. I'm not just doing it to be different or stubborn. You're forced to think of that justification, and so it kind of, I don't know, there's something kind of alchemical that goes on there where you get to understand your own style a little bit better.
Yeah, I think I guess what you were saying, well, your first question being, why do we need editors? And I think that's a good example of it, where if you have someone that you have to explain, like, I mean, you don't have to explain this, how do I put this? You have someone whose job is to read your work that closely. They're not the ones who wrote it. If you've written it, you're like, the act of writing means that you can't be worried about that sort of thing.
Yes.
All the time. You're trying to do something much deeper, and you're creating fiction or whatever you're creating, but you're creating something, and the nature of that means that you're going to miss things, like you're going on.
You're kind of
train
too
gut.
close to
Yeah,
it, like
yeah. So you need an editor because that's the person who can get as close to inside your head as possible without being the one who wrote it.
remaining kind of objective or more objective than you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they can see those things that you didn't have to think about.
Yes. And that's what I always say to people, like, nobody will ever read your book or your work, your piece, as closely as an editor will. Not your mum, your dad, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your best mate, your dog. Nobody, like, they might read it 16 times, but they will never read it with the same attention to the most minute detail and interest in weird verisimilitude that your editor will. And that is, like, it's such a, as a writer, I think it's such a privilege to have that relationship. If, like, not all editorial author relationships are great, but if you have a great editor, you need to really hold on to that and kind of cherish it, because it's so amazing to have that level of trust. And likewise, I think as an editor, and again, the context of me working as an editor has always been different because it was in educational publishing, but you do feel like you're being entrusted with somebody's work, and there's a kind of, I don't know, privilege in that as well.
Yeah, I think that's what makes me love editing, is that I get to be close to that. I get to work with someone who's created something really great, and yeah, it's really, it's I feel like it's a privilege to be able to edit someone's work.
Yeah.
You're asking someone to trust you with something really special and close to them that they've worked on for so long, and it's a cliche by this point in my career, but the author's name is on the book, not yours. And that, like, having that front and center will always make me a particular kind of editor. I think.
Yes.
It's a special thing to be able to edit someone's work.
Yeah, but likewise, do you I don't know, there's that whole thing about an editor's work really being invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like is that felt like a little bit of a bummer for you? Are you ever
I kind of don't mind it. I think I've heard cases for editors being credited on title pages or on imprint pages, which is the page that has all the copyright information. I don't mind, but then again, when a book like Pulse Points comes out, I'm going to be going, I edited that for everyone. So
I tell everyone.
In some cases,
do you know I edited?
Oh my god. Yeah. So in some cases, it's nice to share in the success, but I guess I don't really mind not being. I like that it's invisible, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably, like, I'm just spitballing, thinking out loud here, but I think that's probably why we don't, like, you and I are obviously people who read heaps growing up, and we said before that neither of us had a great idea of what an editor did, or didn't really kind of conceive of it as a job we could do until we were much older. Unlike, I don't know, an accountant or a doctor or whatever it is.
What child says they want to be an accountant?
Not me, but I knew that it was a job that existed, even though I've literally never known an accountant in my life. It was like, I know that's somewhere where, like,
that's a thing.
Yeah, when your financially illiterate parents mess up their taxes, that's who fixes it for them, But I think that's probably part of it, is that editors are kind of so invisible, and so that's, I don't know, I feel like that's probably a big part of it, is that it's not so much that they're not credited as maybe that they're not credited in a way that is instantly visible to you as a consumer or the reader, and so
unless there's a mistake,
then the editor comes in.
Yeah, that's usually okay though. That's okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to cut off your...
No, that's, I was just, like, spitballing anyway. We've got a couple of, the public. Jess asks, what do you find hardest as an editor?
No, I think the hardest thing is learning how to get into the space of a book in a timely way, like the jobbiness of it. I think editing would be great if we could publish the books whenever we wanted and we had all the time to make them ready, and that's very rarely the case. So I guess one of the hardest things would be having to get into the space of being able to edit a book that is going to print very soon.
Yes.
Or that, yeah, I don't have that luxury. That's a challenge. And I guess, I don't know how I get around it. I guess I just have to keep persisting and know that I can always meet a deadline somehow. Which I guess is the other thing, is the difference between writers and editors.
Yeah.
The editors have to if you're a deadline person, you're more likely an editor than a writer.
Oh my god, I remember when I started working in publishing and I was like, I get it now, because my role was not really one of like line editing, it was more structural editing and project management. So I was literally making sure that the deadlines were met, and it was like my butt on the line if they weren't met, and like it had very real consequences, you know, in terms of scheduling and stuff. And so I was finally like I am a deadline oriented person, and with my writing I think it's pretty rare that I am late with stuff. But I remember, you know, the first kind of weeks of being in that job, just being like, I get why it's so stressful, and I get why they send emails checking in to see how I'm going.
Yeah, and I guess because you've got different people, different teams that you have to liaise with. Yeah. So I think that would be what's hardest.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. So another question is balancing. Well, how do you get into the routine of balancing editing and writing? We spoke a little bit about this earlier, but do you have any like rituals or like tips or tricks that help you shift between one kind of cognitive space and the other?
I'm very careful about getting enough sleep and eating as well as I can, and trying not to fall into bad. So they sort of are the structural kind of posts of my day, and then my work sometimes comes into the weekends or evenings. So I've got very small writing kind of blocks, but I try to make sure I have 1 or 2 hours in the week, either after work or before work, where I'm sitting with my writing, and it's not, my goals are time-based, so I try to have 1 or 2 hours during the week where I'm sitting ready to write, and maybe I'll write, maybe I won't, but it's just a time where I go, this is my writing time, and that's all I can do this week. And I don't set those days, I just kind of aim for them throughout the week, because if things happen, I can move them. And then on Saturdays, I wake up mostly early, and then I go and do boxing, and then I go to the library, and then spend about 4 to 6 hours in the library, and then that's my Saturday. And then if I have time on Sunday, I'll do, but Sunday's often the day where things come up. So, and if I need to read something for work or finish an edit, that's the day I do that. So I balance it by basically cutting back to really bare minimum writing time, just because I know that I can't push myself to fit too much more in, otherwise I'll just have breakdowns every week.
That's also really I feel like I've already told you you're grown up, but I really admire that, because it's really hard to like, particularly when you have these interests or jobs or occupations that kind of intersect or complement each other in some way, they can start to bleed into each other. And so I think it's really like what you just mentioned is this really interesting mix of kind of discipline but also flexibility, like not being too hard on yourself, if you know, like not planning for Tuesday night because something might come up and then you can't do it.
And there's been a moment here or there where I've just been, you know, able to write all the poetry, and I don't know where I get the time to do that, but I've written 3 poems, and maybe I wrote them on my way to work, or maybe I wrote them at work, but they just sort of come out, and that's the fine bit, and the idea of the rituals and the putting in time aside is because I don't want to rely on just when I feel like writing poetry. I want to be practicing it and getting better at it and doing more of it. So that's how I.
And I think that's kind of true of most things, is that you can't set aside 6 hours and hope that the muse strikes them, you know? It's like sometimes, I mean, for many of us, we only have 2 hours a week to write, and so you've got to get it done then. And it doesn't mean that what you get done then will be great, but it's like I'm using this time to practice my craft or to read over old stuff or whatever it is, just kind of improve yourself in some way. And it doesn't mean that 2 hours is going to produce the best stuff you've ever written in your life, you know?
Yeah. If you think about, I mean, if you compare writing to learning an instrument or learning a sport or something, you've got the act of doing it, but then there's always like I played violin for 12 years, and there's things like scales and studies and really technical works where they weren't the fun pieces to play, but they were the ones that got your fingers moving a certain way or got you practicing certain bow movements, and they were the things that were helping me do the other things. And I guess like approaching writing in that sense of, I might not be able to do my concerto right now, but I'm just doing some scales, and that could just be little writing exercises, or, you know, describing, like, writing exercises, describing a scene from your week, or writing. Benedict Meyer's got this amazing, really long, crazy list of writing exercises, and that's a good one that I like to go to. And I can't think of, if you just search for that, people can see it, but that sort of thing.
It's really good.
Helps. And it helps you kind of be more okay with being in that smaller space.
Yes, for sure. Not kind of aiming too high, because then you're bound to kind of, that sounds bad, but not trying to fit too much in, because otherwise you're bound to feel bad about whatever you've done. We're going to wrap up our broadcast pretty shortly. Can you just, final question, tell us about your first experience being edited?
It was a memoir literary article that I wrote for a literary journal, and I'd sort of been emailing about something else, and then I just said, I was thinking of writing this thing. I've been writing this thing. Would you be interested? And they said yes, so I had to sort of finish writing it. And it was really sort of gut-wrenching, because the editor wasn't mean or unpleasant. She was really straightforward, but I'd never been edited before, and I just thought, I don't know why I wrote this and thought I could get it published. I clearly can't, and there's all these things wrong with it. And then I'd been talking about writers from Brisbane, and I had not mentioned any women writers, and she pointed it out, and I was like, oh my god, worst feminist ever.
The sense of shame.
And just like it horrified me. And I guess it's like it was really, what it did was make me think about that when I'm editing. To tell authors when they're doing the right thing and when they've done something really good, because it makes such a difference to hear that. And maybe other people are less sensitive than me, but I like to know when I've done something good, so that when I read the bad stuff or the stuff to fix, that it's not all bad.
And also I think the other part of that is that we need positive reinforcement, not just because it makes us feel good, but sometimes as writers we don't know what we're doing right, because I don't know, like I often feel like a whole piece is bad, and I feel like my brain can't even come at it and be like, oh yeah, I like that line or that paragraph or whatever. And so when somebody points out something to you, there's a part of your brain that's like, oh, I need to do more of that, or that's what's working. And sometimes when you're so close to a piece, as we were saying before, it takes somebody kind of objective to do that for you, I think. So I think, without being sort of American about it, I think positive reinforcement is, well, not positive reinforcement, just praise in small amounts for things that merit it are really important.
What was yours?
Mine was actually in VoiceWorks, and that was really amazing because, I know I didn't even plan this. It was really great because it was such a thorough editing process, and the person who worked on it at the time was, oh my gosh, I'm just blanking on his name. He's an old editor of VoiceWorks who I think now works at PRH. Johannes Jacob. And he just did a really kind of clean but generous edit on it, and made a sort of structural suggestion. And I think it was my first experience of having somebody make a big kind of structural suggestion to me. And I think, like, I mean, still now, even though I work with editors who are like, I trust, you know, implicitly, whenever somebody makes a big suggestion to you, there's like a little twinge of resistance, and then you have to go back, or I have to go back and reread it. And I, like 99.9% of the time, I'm like, oh yeah, you're totally right. But there's just this sort of instantaneous, like reflexive thing where it's like, no, I meant what I said. And so it was my first, I don't think we can help that, even, you know, and so it was my first experience of that. And he, it was just incredibly generous and sensitive, I think, as VoiceWorks is with, because, you know, they deal with young and the new writers. And I think I was extremely lucky. That sounds good. Very cool. Anyway, we're going to wrap up. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
No.
It's such a pleasure.
It's a treat for us. And thank you for playing at home, everyone. This session, like all of them, will be available on Facebook and on the Express Media website if you'd like to revisit any of our scintillating discussion from this evening. As I mentioned earlier, submit to VoiceWorks. And I think that's about it from us. Good night and good luck.